Greetings, ladies and mental gents, and welcome to my channel, where I like to make audio narrations of stories from across the internet. In this series, we'll be focusing on a web novel called There Is No Epic Lucha, Only Puns, from the website ReUpload. And in this video, we'll be doing chapters 90 to 92. I hope that you enjoy. There is no epic lucha, only puns. Chapter 90. The dungeon at her village. High note strummed slowly into the long trill. The swell of hope and notes became a song of light and wind, only to be countered by the sudden mountain of challenge. Isabella let her fingers tell a story while her ears listened. Her lute was not even close to the most magical musical item that she had owned and destroyed, but this one had value like very few others had. It was a meeting. It was a chance encounter. It was a meeting of two souls who saw music in each other. This lute was precious. From behind her, the following sounds of strings and percussions followed her story, like shadows, making her simple tale into a memory, her idle strumming into a song. Maestro followed her like a shadow cast off by her light. But Isabella knew that Maestro deserved the light far more than she. "You're thinking too hard to be relaxing," Maestro said with a large form swung slightly closer, his many vines coming off of his cap seeming to allow him great agility when needed. "Perhaps I'm distracted. The dungeon recently got a third floor, yes?" She asked as she put her lute down and sat cross-legged. Maestro was a fierce-looking monster, and for those who had not seen much of the world, perhaps evil-looking, but not to Isabella. To her, every word he spoke and every note he produced was delight and joy. Nothing evil could be so in love with the sharing of music and others. "Indeed, but I'm mum on the details, you hear?" He winked, and he turned serious as Isabella merely nodded. "A dungeon produces particularly potent mana every 3 floors. No one knows why. Something about the number 3 is important to magic and the mana of the world. So even someone like me is growing again. I didn't seal much of my powers away with the lack of mana. I mostly used it to forget. Like Chris's fire and my husband's war cries in the bathtub, my memories are also becoming less grainy." She sighed. "Got some things you'd rather forget?" Maestro asked as he trailed the notes of the hidden piano. Isabella smiled at the distraction, but nodded. "Just for a while. I guess while the brain forgot, my heart didn't. I think it's healed a little." "Oh, Maestro, you're kind, but honestly, I really was, how would the children say, a hag at one point." She shrugged. "What? No. Wait. Did you demand the services of a inhuman race and demand to speak to a clan leader when their followers failed you and demanded a beheading?" Maestro gasped. That made Isabella smile despite her mood. What a strange and wonderful creature Maestro was. "Well, no. I did once curse an entire castle and village to be without noise, without song, without the gift of words," she said, a little embarrassed. The large face leaned down and stared. "Honey, why on Delta's funky tie would you do that? Where are they dicks? Did they eat children? Did they wear sandals and socks unironically?" Maestro demanded. Isabella picked up her lute. "No, they didn't really. It wasn't a question. If you would allow it, when you evolved into this lovely form you have now, did you resent the touch of music?" She asked and plucked 3 notes. "Never. It's how I became me from that little spitter nobody," Maestro said immediately. Isabella doubted Maestro was ever a nobody to Delta. "I grew up seeing music, tasting it. I grew up when songs were used to hurt me by children and soon ex-lovers. They said sweet things, but their notes would be sour. Soon I grew such a state that when the world sang to me, if someone died, an endless list of songs would haunt me. If someone was getting married, I'd be stalked by the bells of some love song. It was maddening. It actually did break me in the end when I just wanted peace. I wanted quiet," Isabella said, heat filling her voice. Then she deflated as she met Maestro's concerned eyes. It just wanted silence. There was a break in talking before she hugged her flute. But in the end, the silence found me. She whispered. Maestro lightly patted her shoulder with his long fingers. "We've been dealing with those guys. Hush, hush. But Delta, good old mum, she's got it handled. Did they hurt you?" he asked with a frown. Worse, they gave me exactly what I wanted, and I let them get the toe into the world. I cut the toe off, but the price I paid. The price. Isabella trembled, and then gathered her wool, and she began to create a soft string melody that reminded her of a lost home. What was the price, hun? The giant mushroom pressed, and Isabella felt a tear gather and fall. Dio sang under his breath as he grinned at Bass seemed to nod to the beat. He hoped that it was a good tune. Mum always said that he sang good. He wondered what he sounded like. Cool? Heroic? Dio kicked up a tune into a crescendo, and Vass tilted his head. How do you sing so well when you shout so much? He asked, lips easy to read. Dio winked. Practice, he said calmly. He opened up the door to the bar and saw the very person that he was looking for. Kemi! He tried to whisper and to get her attention. He was successful, and every bar patron didn't even twitch, but Kemi and her friends did. Kemi turned, and those awesome web earmuffs gleamed around her shoulders. They were looking a bit less shiny, so maybe they needed a tailor to fix them. You knew a tailor. He knew Smalls. He dragged Vass in as he waved to Quist in the corner. The man glared, but he seemed to sigh and then waved back. Vass had turned into a funny frozen shape, arms held wide and eyes shut. His lips moved, but Dio couldn't only read the word tree. Vass was very funny. Kemi, this is Vass. He's a friend who keeps locking himself up. He's a potmaster. Dio nodded. The woman next to Kemi winced and eyed him. Why are you shouting? She asked politely. The large man next to her laughed, and the boring guy with no real standout features just frowned. Sorry, I'll go lower, he promised, but did just that. The woman still winced, so Dio felt a little flush, as he thought he was using his good level of volume. Vass hadn't said anything, so now that he'd been rude in front of Kemi's friends, it's fine. How's your spider leg collection going? Kemi tried to smile, and Dio beamed back. He made sure to speak really, really quietly. Good. They're a bit ripe, but Vass here can make spider pot or something. I wanted you to meet him. He got behind a frozen Vass and pushed him. Then the golem's heels actually seemed to scrape along the floor like a real statue. He saw the bar owner, Nibs, wince as if he was something painful to see, and Dio promised himself to come back with sandpaper and sand down the marks. The group stared at the frozen boy. I think your friend is broken, Kemi said with worry. No, he just likes trees. Dio explained, and that seemed to confuse them. He turned to Vass only to see Quist standing next to the golem. Excuse me, I need another drink. The peacekeeper grunted. Vass moved like he was suddenly water. See? Anyways, since you're new to town, I can help you find a tailor to fix your earmuffs, and we can all get to know each other and become good friends, and make some awesome memories before you go. Dio half-stated, half-asked. Kemi went a little pink as the boring man said something behind his drink and mashed his lips. She'd love to, knowing the local job class masters would be boon in case we need to fix other things. The woman in the leather said and leaned forward with a smile at Kemi, and Dio firmly kept his eyes on her nice eyes. He was raised not to look indecently at anyone without their say-so. Kemi looked sullen. This is for the truth quest, isn't it? She asked. The large man winked. You walk around blindfolded and expect us to ever be okay with that. Please go and be shouted at and make some friends now, with something other than mushrooms and goblins. The man grinned. Don't get hammered this time. The woman also waved cheerfully. Dio took Vass's and Kemi's hands, leading them outside with a little tune. We now have enough members of our team. We shall call it Team Heroic Holy Pot, he announced, and Kemi tried to shrink under the hood as she heard something coming from the bar. Vass finally began to move. Perhaps we can try Team Bless Hero Prezzo, he said, but then Dio blinked and looked down. Vass was right. He had just made a judgment call for them all. He should have been put it to a vote. Team Heroic Holy Pot is actually fine. Right, Kemi? Vass asked the girl, who nodded quickly. Perfect, she promised. Dio beamed. They were going to do great. Just look at the team. Delta wished that she were a god, just so that she could see everything at once. She still was chill and relaxed with Maestro and Isanella. Did she watch the Nina girl literally cloned herself and snapped herself when the first Nina went catatonic when Bob drooled on her? or watched Rudy and the giant beat the crap out of each other as they got drunk and Luna promising the winner to back massage at her spring. She stuck with the Nina girl as Hob and Gob gave the group an odd look before they hurried to the bar, dropping a ton of goodies in the tribute bowls on the way. Her two scouts had been gone quite a while, but they promised her that they had a tale of half to share with once the guests left. "Listen, Drama, you got to handle your own stuff," the second Nina said patiently, and the first girl looked sad. "But Nina, which one are you?" Drama Nina asked. The clone huffed. "I'm the bossy one," she stated without any shame. The mage next to Lordy was simply shaking his head at them. What a weird girl. Doppelganger skills are rare enough in the monsters, but to see them in action with the human and undocumented. He mused. Lordy nodded. Quite a sight. She does seem to be a little, messier when she splits. Side effects? He asked, with a major nodded. When you split, you take on a person or monster and divide that person into two complete halves. Various traits could go either way, he said, and then he made a slow pulling with his hands apart. So when they split again, more traits are divided into even more simple and basic forms. This divide goes on and on until, well, there's nothing left to divide. Seth explained and nodded to the hallway. Shall we go, my fungal friend? The man smiled. Delta liked Seth. He spoke with an intelligence, but not snootily. He seemed to soak in what he saw and passed it under his own opinion. He was fairly attractive too. Delta moved closer and felt that she could almost hear the ocean sound around Seth as his manner drifted off of his form. Quiz was like a crackling wood, so she guessed people's manner had flavors. They reached the mudroom, and Seth grinned as the two Ninas followed. Remember, eat nothing and make normal clones. I don't want a crying Nina out of the unreasonably hungry Nina. Absolute nightmares. Bossy sniffed. Seth looked at Lordy. If it's no bother, I can ask you to make it easier to cross. If that's okay with your call, he offered. Lordy eyed her, and she gave him the thumbs up. Lordy nodded and stepped back as Seth held out one hand, and the mud began to bubble. Delta watched with interest as the mist began to rise, and her mudroom went hard and drier than sand. Seth collected the moisture into a tiny ball and turned it into a tiny bird that rested on his shoulder. I shall return it when I leave, he winked at Lordy. He could clean up the bar in a second, Drama Nina mumbled. Bossy looked calculating. I wonder if we can get blackmail material, she purred. Interesting trick. Lordy applauded. Delta was impressed too, but she also felt a bit nervous. She was relayed her question to Lordy, who tilted his crowned head. Dare say, good fellow, can you pull water out of anything? Like people? She asked as they walked across the cracked mud and the other side. Seth mused. No and yes. That was easy because the dungeon water is the purest. There's no life or material in it. It's water and mana. I can do things a lot easier with it. People, not so much. Even sweat has metals, salts, sometimes more. You have to be aware and familiar with each person to control their water. Could take days, could take years, if they haven't any water at all, he admitted. Sounds deadly. If you do water magic and ice magic so well, what would be your specialization? Lordy asked, also piqued Delta's interest. Seth's face went still before he managed a sad smile. Natural disasters, if I had to pick a phrase, he walked on. Delta snorted. I'll ask Rudy to get you a house. Welcome to Durance, she commented, but the man didn't even hear her. Damn it. Delta knew that was funny to be ignored. She was going to enjoy the fourth floor. Boring, any more people or hidden Scientology cults lurking there. Rubario Smalls was a man who did not feel like he was shocked by much of anything these days. Living in Durance and having had a full life as an adventurer in both dungeons and popular fashion shows made him quite experienced in bloodshed. However, dungeons tended to be simpler. Grams and Small had only arrived in the last 2 years and had only just begun to feel the grey settling in over them. The letter had been true and the dungeon had appeared. A very odd dungeon for its very odd town. Smalls loved it. It was such a unique soul amongst the drab pitfalls, spikes, screaming little horrid monsters, and no decent laboratory of many floors. He hummed as he stitched along the cloak. It was a custom order, and he whistled as he sewed the file sigil into the hem of the cloak and turned invisible. He had a long overdue custom order list from many places, but the local letter ban had meant that he actually was getting through the list. Finally, he eyed the cloak and added 3-pronged apple symbol, which would turn the magic off if the wearer intentionally entered an outhouse or a shower room. It would use the owner's own mind to alert the sigil. Nothing invasive, just a surface thought, but enough to prevent Smalls from worrying if he had just loosed a predator on the unaware. Now extremely worried, he added 3 more symbols to shut the magic off, slowly, if the wearer got excited under the cloak while any circumstances. Rubario Smalls would not accept his products being used in such crass things. The people deserved to know that while their government secrets were being pilfered, their decency was not. He looked proud. The symbols he embroidered were actually parts of a complex magical lettering system using 10 interlocking sigils. It had taken Smalls years to figure out how to sew them in so close that they formed a whole new letters by proxy. Some he learned from the team leader, may he rest in peace. Some he'd figured out by sewing in the dark of a dungeon as they camped. He ran a thumb over one symbol. Those were the days, never knowing when the next payment would come, never knowing if the next dungeon dive would be the last, never knowing what the day would bring. But they had each other, and that was Smalls' happiest days. "You look sad, my friend." Cram appeared with a huge axe. Smalls quickly brushed his lashes, and his eyes seemed to be a flurry while he collected himself. "Just thinking of the old days," he admitted. Cram slapped him on the shoulder. "Stop thinking and make pretty things." Cram winked as he sat down at the dinner table and propped up a fresh bottle of Nim's Bar. Smalls was about to retort that he himself was pretty, and thus he was also his creations, when there was a rather strange bang. Only the fact that Smalls had reinforced the door had prevented it from falling off of its hinges at the powerful knock. "Mr. Smalls, Mr. Cram, I got an emergency earmuff problem." Dio Brando called. Cram winced. "Yeah, the problem is a shortage of them." "Oh well, let the kin in, Smalls. He won't bite," Cram insisted. It was easy for the lumberjack to say. The man had practiced listening to the trees fall. Smalls prayed for strength and then chided himself for being so overdramatic. Dio, a boy that looked vaguely familiar, and a girl, a little older, who looked at Smalls with a pleading look, to either save her, or to end her, or to convey the desperate need of an outhouse. "Hello," Smalls said politely, as he shook Dio's firm handshake. He hid a wince behind the mask of casual interest. The boy was strong. It always took Smalls by surprise. "Hello, Mr. Smalls. This is Vass and Kemi. Vass is a golem and Kemi is an adventurer," Dio said calmly. Smalls eyed his 2 friends with more interest. "Oh, please do come in. Cram was just about to make tea," he explained. The grunt of grace and sophistication that came from Cram showed that he had no intent on doing anything of the sort, but a glare at Smalls had the huge man bending over the fireplace to put a copper kettle in. He sighed at the rip the man had running down in the rear of his pants. He had been buffed again since the miner had returned in order to chop up faster. He had to fix those pants. It was a small favor that his underwear was stretchy. No need to give the young woman and Golem a view of something that they would need a mind healer for. Dio was too busy looking at Cram's collection of wooden carvings to notice. "Kemi has," Dio began, as Smalls struck one of the prepared sweets for his guests into the boy's mouth. A hard fudge candy seemed to act like glue, and Dio smiled in pleasure as he chewed it into tar. That would keep the boy's mouth shut and busy for a small while. "Yes, I heard. Something to do with earmuffs?" he repeated, and the girl, Kemi, pulled off a pair of silvery earmuffs that he had noticed. Odd things, too pure and clean for simplistic cheap materials. It reminded Smalls of the spider threads from the dungeon, but more refined. Evolved. Now that he actually was bothering to pay attention to his guests, the girl was giving off a dungeon manor vibes. A recent plunderer, it seemed. "I got these as a gift, and I would really like to keep them around, but the tailors with the actual job classes are in the capital as far as I know." The girl looked down. Cram smashed his head on the stone alcove above the fireplace and cracked a little. Bad idea bringing them up," Cram warned, but Smalls crossed his legs and held out a hand with his damn cup of tea. "Them? Are you referring to the Golden Spool Guild of charlatans and braggarts? The fools who couldn't tell a needle from a twig? Those meatheads, pardon my rudeness, Cram, Who stuff magic into a dress and declare it a job done? Bah! I declare, bah! Smalls sipped his scalding tea without milk or sugar. This simply was not the time for milk or sugar. Oh, did I mean them to be, but I didn't want to upset you either, Cammy said, trying to take back the muffs, but Smalls held on. All wounds are hard to avoid when you do not know what causes them. No offense taken, I'm just easily ruffled by cheap work, he said, and turned the spider earmuffs over and over. Rather basic without any enchantments, though it was finely made. The natural breakdown was well on its way, however, and that was easy enough to fix. He focused on the item, his manner gathering in his fingers. Cammy gasped, Vast looked interested, and Dio was busy being distracted by Cram carving a tiny figurine of Smalls scowling. Smalls glared at the figure. It was annoyingly good work. His manner surrounded the muffs in a silky globe that began to rotate the item. The basic tailor class would need a proper bench, materials, and a few hours. A journeyman would need a basic kit and some intense focus. A master would simply need materials and a deep understanding of his chosen field. Be it silk, leather, dresses, suits, coats. There'd been so many types and examples that one detail was engraved into their mind. The detail being a single phrase. For some, it was thread, or cloth, or even gold stitching, and it would allow them a medium to manipulate the item and soak their mana in. For Smalls, it had simply needed a few seconds and his mana to do simple tasks like this. His mana slowly overlaid with the dungeon mana. Learned where it formed reality, where his earmuff and where was dungeon. Smalls began to replace the dungeon mana, decaying without the core power, with his own natural mana that would simply be. The earmuff glowed and the silky bubble faded as Smalls examined the piece. No degradation or corruption, no misfires or transmutations, and best of all, no ticking timer to breaking apart from anything but the ravages of time. Even then, Smalls was pretty certain it would last quite a while. The ability to keep the durability counter on an item, forcing customers to return in order to refill the time limit was... Smalls was but a small minority that spoke out when the guild's craft began to greedily apply this practice. It led to a rich hoarding of magical items, and the poor forced to spend most of their life returning to the dungeon where their fire sword or stone shield had been found to restore its dungeon mana. This was not why the class was formed, not for the greed of coins, rather it was a passion of cloth. The thread and needle were the sword and wand, and the girl spat on it, and by proxy, Smalls. Ah well, he had gotten his revenge in the end. Smalls handed the muffs to the now wide-eyed Kemi. You're a master-level tailor, she squeaked. Smalls had a smile at that. The girl was wonderfully untouched by the horrors of this world. Cram snorted. Let's go with that before he toots his own horn and pulls out his closet. He mumbled. I would never do that to a guest, unless they asked to see my collection. I'm sure I haven't dusted off the Nebula Drake Scales miniskirt in a while. I'll need to wash the Blossom Hair standbag, but it still smells as sweet as a field in spring. He chuckled. His works were like a balm to his temper. Mr. Smalls, the earmuffs look good as new, Vass said and blinked at them. How did you do that? He met Smalls's eyes with a blunt and interested expression. Many years of sewing up, my friends. It left me with the talent in the area. I'd simply traded scars and blood with cloth and dyes. He poured the tea for the column, who simply drained it in one gulp. Ah, now he remembered. Japes's boy. Nice to see the lad actually looking human these days, rather than that monstrous form Japes had shaped him into during the minor skirmish. Thank you. How much do I owe you? Kemi asked, face pinched with worry. Smalls could simply gush at the girl. Then he was hit with a delicious idea. Oh no. Cram mumbled as a confused Dio chewed on the fudge trap and stared. I don't suppose you'd be willing to, do your next dungeon dive in a rented piece of clothing, would you? I haven't advertised in years, Smalls purred. Kemi's innocent look of confusion made Ribari Smalls feel like a crafting guildmaster once more. He looked over at the knick-knack shelf where he had dumped the odds and ends that he'd found during his time in Durance. The standalone item was, of course, the golden spool of thread that would make even plebeian clothing into royal treasure. Shame how the best guild in the city had lost this little relic, and to his knowledge, still hadn't announced it publicly. Wasn't some prince's birthday coming up? Oh, now that was going to be deliciously sweet to hear the news of. After all the money in the world would struggle to buy the actual talent in a pinch. He swept Kemi into the closet, which was a really large tunnel underground leading into an armory. Bat Queen dress? No, perhaps mimic wood. Smalls danced around with excitement as Kemi stared at the room that actually vanished into the horizon. Smalls guessed that he had gone a little overboard when he got bored. Who didn't? He paused at one of the glowing racks of clothes, and his smile went from divine to devilish. Perfect. End of chapter. There is no epic lucha, only puns. Chapter 91. Nina, a hand? The giant pig that lived in the magical mushroom forest was nice. He was rather relaxed when Lord Mushy called for him. Drama Nina hadn't even seen the boulder-covered mushrooms for the creature it was until the head appeared. The scoundrel will rest all day if you allow him, Lord Mushy promised, as he twirled a ball of mud around in his hand. His fingers glowed like the mushrooms on the ceiling, and the mud began to take a round shape. Bossy Nina looked at it with the silence in her eyes. It was stunning. The tiny etchings on the side and the rimmed opening of the vase was really quickly forming would be beautiful in appearance if it was set properly. The boar accepted Drama Nina's petting, heeded Lord Mushy's warning not to pluck any of the mushrooms or it would upset Bori. Seth and Lord broke into an enchanting language of Seth's once more, but Drama Nina was distracted by his lazy Nina back at the bar split into her own violation and sent the new clone to do the work. That made Drama Nina sigh. The good news was that the Nina that formed was perfectionist Nina. The sight of undone dishes drove her mad and dug in with a war cry. Lazy Nina nodded to clumsy Nina. Damn it, it was already starting. Lazy would make perfectionist do her job. Then perfect would be annoyed at the uneven number of clones and split again, which might make either sleepy Nina or Lady Nina find the bar, gather herself, be as whole as she can be. Idly, she opened up her mind connectivity to all of the clones and sighed once again. Ambitious Nina didn't appear. Her missing part, her missing Nina. Where was she? Something to brood over later when she got drunk. Being drunk or under the effects of substances made her unable to split. Something about extra chemicals in her veins made the magic go wonky. It was why Nina wouldn't wear magical items either. It was unwise to duplicate magical items unless you knew what you needed, or if you wanted to see a confused clone explode a second later. Gory chunks that rained down that day and that had put Nina off cloning for a while. The pig stood up and waddled off as Mushy placed a solid pot down and reached into the bucket that was kept out of sight for more mud. The creature seemed to love making these oddly pretty pots with unorthodox patterns. The pot depicting the creature known as Bob was something Nina had shoved into Seth's arms. She wasn't ready to confront that trauma yet. The mushroom grove smelled wet, but not off-putting. The dungeon had a point, in fact, that her mushrooms didn't need decaying matter to grow or spread. Some of the star mushrooms were pretty, and she idly ran her hand over a few of them. The only ones that she had to watch out for were the black ones, according to Lord Mushy. Bossy Nina talked about the pot sales and how many people had patented his work. The girl was a little high-strung on being in charge of things. Her hand brushed an odd cap and it twitched. Drama Nina froze as she looked down into the eyes that glowed like stars. The black cap had looked and read in the light, but a tiny little fluffy white body that softly trotted towards with flat feet rushed past Drama Nina and latched onto Lord Mushy's leg. "Little Missy, what are you doing all the way up from the second floor? Did you follow me and Quee upstairs?" Lord Mushy asked, and the tiny mushroom, Missy, merely buried her head into his leg harder. It definitely was a she because Nina got the strongest little sister vibes ever, risked a glance at Seth and Nina's. She didn't speak, but handed Lord a flower and a deep blue color that was striking in its beauty. Ah, another one. The Lord chuckled as he held his new pot in one hand, where it began to flop again without another hand to shape it. Lord placed the blue flower into his crown like cap, before lifting the monster known as Missy onto his shoulder. Guests, may I introduce you to Missy of the Stars? He boomed. Bossy Nina and Seth shared a look as Drama Nina looked amazed. Drama Nina made a little ooh noise and Missy waved. Of the Stars? That was a title to be begged for a story. Maybe it was because the monsters were so alien from another dimension. All sorts of weird things fell from the stars. Everyone knew that stars were gates to other realms. So why the title? Bossy asked. Drama shot her a glare at for trying to ruin the mystery. Lord raised his weirdly shaped pot and held with his middle. Little miss, can you? He asked cheerfully. The sweet little alien blinked before nodding. She stared at the pot. Drama Nina pushed Bossy into a pile of mushrooms to get a better view. Alien magic? The Lord threw the pot up, and the little starry eyes exploded like a nova of twin death beams of deathly death, fried it into a solid glittering vase with 3 handles. An alien had dead death beam. Drama Nina turned and ran for her life. I swear, I can't believe she'd missed the opportunity to patent her name of this move. How do you feel about it? Twin Nova Beam attack. We must appeal to the children. Bossy's fading voice offered. Drama barely focused. The next room looked like a hole in some fortress, but Nina panicked and looked around, seeing a well. Darkness. Cover from the deadly lasers. She dove in to safety. That's not good, Delta said bluntly as the girl who acted like a rabbit on energy drinks began to lower herself into the well. Vera, get the stick, she called quickly. This was the life. Ruli sipped some more of a shroom pop. She loved it, hated it, and then loved it again. The jungle sun was out for a blast as she rested on Bob's pool. The beast was elsewhere for the moment, and she rested as her skin soaked up the sun rays and the bees buzzed. Birds sang, and the tiny devils skulked in the bush. This was the life. Still, one weird thing to all of this was, of course, her new friend. Ruli opened one eye to see the sword laying next to her, as if soaking up the rays. "How are you doing?" she asked, and the veins on the blade blazed red like molten lava. Feeling smart, Ruli named the blade Magma. It looked like a fiery scar of earth, and Ruli kinda liked its spunk and to follow her around. It was a demon sword, all right. It had that feeling, kinda spicy and smoky. It also looked metal as heck. Ruli had given up on locking it away in Farah's bar and just enjoyed having a decent weapon around. The person who gave it to her, that was something Ruli would have to snoop out later. Much later, when her paradise got boring. A few bees dropped the honey into the pop, and boy, did it taste crappy. No, wait. Amazing! Ruli sighed and rested once more. She enjoyed having Delta to herself in a weird way. Not only did all her monsters give her VIP treatment, it was free. Delta, that sweet but shy avatar of hers, made Ruli grin. The memory of the sweet as honey. What a girl, made a beer and defeated evil. She watched as the sword vanished and a bunch of those runty mushroom monsters fled from the bush as magma toppled over the top of them, leaving behind the blowguns and darts. Nice Maggie, good sword, Ruli mumbled as she began to drift off once more. Drama Nina was safe. She crawled in beside the coins and pearls in any nook. The death lasers came, she had ammunition. The best part was that the water didn't reach high enough to flood in. It was actually a little warm in here. This had to be a secret dungeon, and she, Drama Nina, had found it. Suck it, Explorer Nina. She looked around and saw the dangling ruby-like necklace. It glinted in the low light and was slightly swaying. Drama Nina eyed it. Oh, her hands were moving. They were seeming to be aiming for the necklace. Odd. In her head, perfectionist Nina was arranging tables and ordered that metal wool to be used on all of the wood, as Nibs begged for her to stop. Lazy Nina into her view and whistled. Looks kinda nice, she admitted. Her fingers brushed the necklace and pulled. The effect was like a basket being held up by a stick getting yanked away as Nina set off the trap. The roof of the nook snapped down into the darkness, took her. "Alien caves got me! I'm going to be dissected for the barmaid secrets," she screamed. Tiny little teeth slid down and locked the ceiling to the floor. "That's not the case," Perfectionist chided, while she began to trim Nib's beard and the man began to turn red. "Aye, you buggering clam, spit her out," a gruff voice commanded, and the shining pole of justice wedged into the alien crave and began to leverage it open. Drama Nina crawled out, still clutching the necklace. "My hero!" she cried, and then looked down to see a pissed expression of a goblin. "Hero? Heroes don't get paid for being helpful," the goblin growled, taking the necklace and chucking it back in to what Drama Nina could now see was a giant clam. Nina felt like crying as she saw the loot flying in, and her mind fought with instincts of staying safe and diving for the treasure. The sucky part of already being split so much was that her will to stop herself from splitting was reduced. Nina watched as another Nina flew out of her body after it. "Mine! Mine! My precious beauty!" Hoarder Nina shrieked. The clam opened up its huge mouth as Hoarder Nina almost gasped in pleasure at the sight of the gold and jewels before she was swallowed whole. The clam shut up tighter and a bank vault, and a faint giggling could be heard from within. The good news was that any interest Drama Nina had in the jewelry or shiny things was gone. Just flat out not there anymore. So now that she could focus on the deadly lasers. "Come on, you and the good-looking bloke are in my bar." The goblin huffed and walked towards the ladder out of the wall. Drama Nina blinked. "Bar?" she repeated, and then she turned to the clam. "I'll get her on the way out," she promised, and followed the goblin. The clam just rocked back and forth, its odd, decorative eyes bobbing. New was a cautious menu. He decided that while Delta dropped everything to go party with the intruders, he would watch what the Silence and its cult might be plotting. Not that he could do anything else. Floor 2 had Rudy on it, and the first floor was literally becoming infested by these Ninas. Thankfully, Jack was now a contract, and slowly his own natural mana would be replaced with Delta's. The process would take years, but eventually Jack would lose the power to go outside in return for great power inside. Such was the nature of contracts. New also knew that Jack's natural mana would be filtered into Delta's as a consequence, and hoped that would only result in some minor love for explosions. Nothing quite like the idea of Delta going insane or deciding to become an evil weirder than she already was. He watched as the garden changed, as Delta's mana finished up. He swore it was almost sulking, but dismissed that thought as silly. The fountain was replaced by a deep well with arches around it. In the water, mana glowed a deep orange, pure, unshaped orange mana. That was by far the best and worst thing New had ever seen. The Delta fountain could literally drink Delta mana to do. Well, the list was long, but this easily tied up the map room for efficient ways to begin affecting people with Delta. A temporary boost to recovery would be possible. Perhaps an upgrade to some natural ability or strength. It was rare, but some dungeons did offer such upgrades, and one braved the risks. The downsides, and it really was a downer, was that it was just in the middle of the garden. It wasn't hidden, it wasn't protected. Anyone with anything could have a sip. It was irksome. What if the slug-gurgling, flea-ridden waste of precious existence cult members sipped? It would give the Silence a deeper connection to Delta. He sighed and floated closer. Another bit of good news was that the boost was a one-time thing. The mana could only change beings once. The pulsing runes along the walls were complicated, and suspected that Sis was taking care to make sure that she was limited. As far as he could see, the mana would mingle with the natural mana of a person, find out where it was best used, and push it to a new level. Painful would be putting it lightly if it was done in a single dose. Small, careful sips over time. That would be less gruesome. Sip until you hit that limit and you broke through. That would help people. Really, give them a reason to come and think Delta was too nice and kind. New was going to remind them that this was still a dungeon. he began to focus on his goal. Keeping Delta alive, keeping Delta from being abused, keeping Delta happy. Nothing else mattered. He glared, he plotted, and most of all, he crafted traps. When he was done, he turned and he watched Nashley. Anyone who your mother doesn't like, crush them before they touch this wall. He warned. The troll frowned at the garden. What? Well? She grumbled, staring at his work. Nu turned and faced the door still unconquered. The quiet was worrying, but he was far from done. Above every second door in this room, he began to gather mana and intent. He had never done this before. He had never let himself do this. But as things appeared and his purpose became crooked, Sis took notice. He formed 4 hunching statues to stand guard for any interlopers. His orders made them still, and the monsters went to sleep with only half efficient awareness of their surroundings. Maybe Delta might not notice them as quickly. Delta could be in the light and be happy with people, but Nu was content in being down here, waging war. He was content to be her shadow, because no one could bear to be closer to one's own shadow. And if jerks made it down this far, it was better to be prepared. After all, who knew when trouble would come around from below or above? He paused. He felt sick, and he swore to himself that he would never do that again. He would have to leave it to Delta to make the Goyles a spawn room and to turn the garden into one. He really felt like he was at his limit for pushing his power over the dungeon. He looked around the garden with the 9 doors and Nu wasn't sure if it was anticipation or worry that made him want to have their secrets laid bare. He honestly wished that he could just grab a sword and do the job himself. But that option wasn't available to him now. That's why he and Delta had minions, very strong minions. And he had no doubt that the cult had some horrible beings waiting for them. They had so many years of testing ever-reverting subjects until something stuck. That spoke of trouble, and Nu was very good at tackling trouble. He was more worried about Delta. If she found some more monstrous creatures or something, she might try to befriend it. Or worse, cry. Nu would not let that happen, not while he had something to protect. You make a compelling argument, Bossy admitted as they stood outside the very bar that they had come in search of. You know I do. Come on, with Perfect Nina and Lazy Nina splitting for the heck of it, we need to pull together. So go and get Hoarder Nina and we'll smash together, balancing out the splitting, Drama Nina explained. Being one of the older clones meant that she could come to senses of the original Nina, just a little. Bossy narrowed her eyes, and Drama Nina quickly did some repair work before Bossy stormed off. It lets you get back to the driver's seat, get Hoarder under control and bring me into the line, Drama said, and nodded. That made her clone smile. Bossy went off without a word. She pushed past the large wooden fort that guarded the bar. Drama Nina could see how the towers would offer decent cover against the climbers. The various mounds and slippery mud made the climb even worse. Nina, all of them, were just going to have to pay a fine to the devil to clam and move on. She looked up and read the name of the bar just as visible from the outside. The Swarthy Hog. It sounded like a place to find grizzled old men and potential lost princesses. No wonder Nibs was so excited about it. There was a faint buzz as Bossy took Hoarder back into herself. The feeling made all the Ninas tingle. That feeling was her only way of coming back into the split too far. Mindless Ninas, wandering for food and attacking everything until one got an idea to eat another Nina. That usually stuck them together, and the first rush of human pleasure that the clone would feel would spread. And soon all the Ninas would hunt other Ninas until the spark of intelligence returned to the Nina mind. It was hard to see, hear, and remember the things that the lesser Ninas had done. But if she was lucky, if it was just funny stories and bumbling bitey twins in the forest, worst case was being hunted or attempted murder. That always sucked. Bossy returned and Nina smiled as Bossy held out her hand. She took it and Bossy vanished into a shimmering green cloud as the mana that was taken back into Drama Nina. Control, desire, the emotions and the ideas were suddenly real again. They were hers. It felt like being a person again. She turned and entered the bar, more Nina than before. The place was a little bare bones, but hardly the worst place Nina had ever seen. The goblin who saved her was serving drinks to Seth and 2 goblins armed with bags and weapons. Lord Mushy and Missy occasionally used the spray bottle to mist themselves down with clear water. The large mounted boar's head above the entrance was a fake, as the boar looked less defeated, less strung up, and more like a watching protector of the place. Round tables were placed between them and the sturdy pillars. On one side was a crackling hearth that bathed the room in a warm dancing light. A collection of mushrooms growing out of the wall nearby was playing something rather sad, a piano melody of something soft, tender. Neither heard the bloke go anywhere before excited. Wonder what's got him all torn up. The goblin asked Lord Mushy. The giant monster put down his thin flower vase and sighed. People, such wonderful things, but they all have their own pasts. I can't imagine having a year's worth of memories, let alone, say, 35. I do believe that my head would explode. Wouldn't you agree, my fair lady Farah? He gruffly said, and Farah poured herself a shot of something familiar, and nodded, not scowling as hard as she shot Missy a crooked smile, and the little mushroom kicked her legs out of the high stool. Is that Nib's brew? Nina called out, and the goblin Farah looked up. Was. Tasted like pig swirl, so I made it better, she said, as if the response to something only she could hear. Farah coughed. No offence to the maker, she added, with a little warmth in her tone. Seth raised a glass of the bubbling brown drink up. His face revolted before he took another deep swig. Evil, but heavenly, he marvelled. Odd. Farah turned back to Lord Mushy. We got Mum's memories to a point, so that isn't the same. I keep getting ideas for drinks I've never heard of. Something called cocktails, but they're too fancy for this place. Farah dismissed and looked at the standing Nina. Make your order or grab a mop and clean. Standing there is ruining the view, she ordered. Nina, hearing this almost daily, snapped to attention and looked around for the mop, only for none to be found. Ha! This is a dungeon bar. Stains and marks are intentional. Sit down and get your drink, Farah ordered. Nina did so, pulling out the letter from Nibs as she handed it to some kind of drink that Seth was drinking. Was drinking? She stared at the empty glass. Vanished. Some taker of things. No. I'm in love, he mumbled. Farah took a note and opened the seal and one of her very long fingernails. Nina took a sip and froze. The drink was something awful like lich spit, a corrosive evil liquid that destroyed all that it touched. Such evil that would consume Nina and leave a husk of a woman. She almost broke out and cried, but then the darkness came life and light. Joy and love danced across her tongue, and her body felt the light, as if she would float off the stool at any moment and hit her stomach, and she got a head rush, as if it was just had the best night of her life, and now came to the bubbly and cute pillow talk. The drink tore her opinion in two, and thus it tore Nina in two. Farah scowled at the letter. She didn't know exactly how to read. Speaking was easy. Everyone in the dungeon spoke the same language. She closed her eyes, and Mum, good old mother, let her tap into her own knowledge. Farah wasn't one for compliments, but Mum was smart, scary smart. She knew the whole language and even parts of others. Farah would beat the snot out of anyone who called her Mum dumb, and then shoot them. She focused on the words began to blend together to make it work. The local language was now in Farah's mind. Ah, words. Farah needed to make a menu with some boards to declare her wares. The letter was short and to the point. Farah's rise in power would not go unignored. While she was highly respected for her profession, Niblet's lunch and drink pub would not stand idly by. Farah was to be prepared to be utterly shown up as an amateur she was, and a small extra note invited her for a free drink if she ever managed to break the rules of the dungeon and not be abomination. Farah narrowed her eyes. Rude. How utterly rude. A free drink. How dare this Nibs? Farah had treasure for days. She even had a crime guarding it. She tore the letter up and finally turned to see what the noise was coming from her bar was. She paused as the girl who had come in splitting into copies of herself. Each of the girls snatched up a shroom pop and buzzed, splitting again. The splitting was happening faster and faster. The bar was getting rather full, and the girls were beginning to screech at each other. Farah's nostrils flared, and she reached under her bar. All the girls, even the ones baring teeth and snarling, froze as the almighty boomstick announced itself with a bang into the ceiling and a shower of wood chips. Enough of this. I want you all back in one piece before I fill your rears with burning pellets. She roared, and the room shook with her anger. She was the damn room guardian at this place, and she would not let it be trampled. There was a beat before the clones began to pop out of sight. In the end, there was only one left, who looked confused and dazed. "I'm sorry, she said, and Farah looked at the two broken stools and her other disturbed customers. Missy was on top of Lordy, hiding in nervous fear. Seth had a new drink all down his front. Unacceptable. She reached under the bar and threw something at the girl. It was an orange apron with frills. "Tomorrow morning, be here and work off your debt," she growled. Inside, she was smirking. "Sorry, Nibs, but Farah had just pulled ahead in the race." "But my other job," the girl protested. "Split. You seem to be good at it," Farah replied, waspishly. The apron was meant to be a reward that made someone better at making drinks, or something similar. But Farah had never had planned on giving it out. The girl wasn't bound or even likely to turn up, but Farah looked at the floating form of her mum. "You deal with the consequences. She's a real person, and you might not be aware of how much you're biting off," came the words of wisdom. Farah jutted out her chin just ever so slightly. Farah always knew what she was biting into. That was one of the benefits of being the cook. Nina meekly approached the bar. "Can I have something to eat?" she asked. Farah narrowed her eyes and tapped her finger on the bar as she gave her recommendation. "You want mushroom soup? It's less conflicting," she said. The girl opened her mouth to argue. "You want the soup?" Farah insisted. A beat later, the girl nodded. 5 minutes later, it was free, not like these guests were even paying. Nina, the girl's name, sipped the brew. She blinked and then looked up. "It's good," she said, and Farah was just glad that she didn't split again. "You get free meals when working here. Also, a break in the pawn room and a tour of the jungle," she added in the rewards. Her intent wasn't to make the girl suffer, but to let her see how experienced the bar, and a bit more. Then she could spread the news when she returned home. Also, it wasn't about the stools, but Farah wanted it known very early that if trouble was to be started in her bar, there would be consequences. Money was not going to be accepted, only very valuable trinkets for mum or honest work. This was not a pay-to-win kind of place. Farah thought about that and then went through the back to get the blackboard and chalk. She began to write. "Farah's bar. Rules. No fighting, I'll end it. No stealing, I'll take back more. No breaking things, you'll pay for it. No money accepted. Ignoring these rules will be open to being shot. Surviving this, you'll be shot again. If you live through that, Farah will get the boss next door to pay you a visit. Boss will not be happy. Tips to servers are acceptable, since they have lives and need for money." After a bit of time reading this over, Farah added one more line. "No cloning allowed in the bar." Farah had a feeling this list of rules would only be getting bigger. End of chapter. There is no epic lucha, only puns. Chapter 92. Fresh Breath of Seth. "I'll escort her back," Isanella promised as she emerged from Farah's kitchen with a short while later. She looked a little bit more melancholic than before. Seth gave her a deep frown. "I could, what was the word? Hold you back with my magic. I do not experience joy if you are harmed," Seth said. The goblin shook her head at the exchange. It may truly be the oddest experience for the dungeon to hear foreigners exchange words with each other. Isanella shook her head and held her lute tighter with a glint in her eye. "We will destroy all foes," she said back in Seth's own mother tongue. Her expertise in Seth's language was oddly militaristic. She had words and phrases that often related or involved battle in some manner. Seth was beginning to think Isanella had been near his people in a skirmish of some sort, which was definitely odd, since Isanella was a sweet housewife and a marvelous tea maker, but they all had pasts. Nina was twirling her new apron. She said something to the bartender, who smirked. For someone who was basically being drafted into servitude, Nina didn't seem that torn. Perhaps because the mushroom soup was simply that good of a treat, or maybe it was the offer of the further rewards. Isanella waved goodbye and leaned down to plant a kiss on one of the singing mushrooms. She said something soft to it, and it responded with a soft, affectionate piano melody. Vera handed Nina a list of things that Seth thought could either be as simple food items or parts of a dragon. His written understanding of the country wasn't much better than his spoken one, but honestly, Seth wasn't sure which was worse endurance. The town had a very quest-like manner of making simple things end up in fire. He waved them farewell and honestly was a little amused that he was about to have a much deeper conversation with the dungeon-born than the villagers he had been staying with. Seth really needed to knuckle down and learn the local tongue. He just needed a teacher, someone that wasn't Mr. Jones, the knowledge demon. Someone else. Anyone else. "Grim!" Dio called. Grimoire closed his eyes and counted to 5 before he turned to see Dio and the 2 weirdos with him. One was the potter's kid, Bass or something, and the other was a priestess girl, but... Grim opened his mouth, but then he closed it again. Her basic robe and hood were gone. The long, flowing and glowing white robe that she now donned was like a walking cloud. Her aura, hidden before, was being pushed into the surface with a golden manner of honesty soaked into the air around her. The robe was so thin and odd that the tail end broke apart and reformed into rocks and twigs and things to snag on it. And yet, when she went to hide her face, her hand simply phased through the material as if it was no hindrance. The material shimmered as if hidden sun would be glowing off the girl's body. Dozens of intricate tiny symbols pulsed with her manner, and the glow settled over Dio and Vass. They grinned as if tickled. She looked like one of the strong gusts would blow the outfit away, but the sheer density of the costume gave off vibes of virtue and innocence. It was, to Grim, the ultimate balance between eye-catching and inspiring. The girl went pink at Grim's staring and pulled her new hood up. The divine image was ruined by the childish pop-up halo, and that had been quickly sewn on at the last moment. That hovered over the girl's head. "The halo was my idea," Dio calmly explained. "I should have guessed, Brondo. How you convince masters of the art into doing childish things is a mystery," he snipped. The boy's bubbles was annoyingly bright today. "I got a new bow tie," Blaz said, with a cheery red bow tie. Looked rather nice, if nothing else. Grim looked at Dio and waited. The boy pulled out a freshly carved flute. "Graham made me a flute. I wanted to play you a song because you looked down," he said, and he put the piece to his mouth. Oh no. The first clear note was like an arrow. It shot through Grim as he knew it was too late. Dio was fine, if Grim was to be honest. Dio on instruments, rather a different story. Dio's fingers flew over the flute with the melody warbled out in some epic stanza that he didn't stop. For 30 seconds straight, Dio made an endless tune with his fingers moved like a master over a wooden instrument. The wind was redirected, the birds gathered in awe, and a deep, some hellish abyss devil put its fiddle down in defeat. Kemi's cloud dress was struggled to hold together, and the Potter boy was gaping in shock as Dio's own hair was being flung about as the music reached the crescendo of his epic solo. Grim felt inspired, annoyed, grumpy, awed, and a little jealous. The worst thing was that Dio didn't even know how annoyingly good he was at this. The boy could make music dance to his tune and never even know about it. Dio beamed, huffing a little after the tuning out the loud voice into the loud flute solo. "Feel better?" he asked. Grim jerkily nodded. "Ecstatic," he said clearly, making sure that never to look away or mumble. The priestess spoke, but she was not even in Dio's sight. Usually, the boy was good enough to be constantly checking his comrades' faces in case they were talking, but he seemed rather focused on Grim. The girl closed her eyes. Holy Mother of Truth, give me strength and the courage to help this boy. Please, let me help him. He means well, but he does not deserve this fate," she said clearly, and Grim actually raised an eyebrow. "Well, lady, he's deaf, not hopeless. You could wait until he was out of the proverbial earshot before you saying that." He grunted and turned to leave. Dio called after him, and he was pulled into a one-armed hug as Dio made a suddenly interesting decision. The second floor of Delta. Grim's eyes glazed over as the thoughts of success and loot. Kemi was staring in an absolute shock as the two boys. The boy had understood her. She hadn't meant to be heard, hence the prayer was in deep lost tongue of a first folk that worshipped her goddess, the lost of the language hosted in a monastery for the first 4 generations of truth seekers. How did this boy, someone who had never left this village, know her language? Seth was on a mission to explore the dungeon. He planned to see the wonders of the space might have. Even better, he could treat it as a nice trip, since he was unwilling to kill Seth unless he stepped out of line. Really, there was no difference when walking on the sovereign soil of another nation, respect the laws or face punishment. The matter of who would win was a moot point. Seth would lose a nice guest status, and he had, and that would be a shame. The first order of business was to see Isanella's friend. He asked Farah, who merely guided him into the hidden passage behind the wall, which he thanked her for, and with a promise to clean up her bar, and the compliment with an amazing soup. "Don't flirt with me, water boy. No discounts for return trips," she grumbled, but her ears did look a little bit perkier. Seth, charming, he knew it. Various men, women, and others of the world knew it very well. If Seth had a bad side, it was that he fell in love too easily and broke too many hearts when he found he could never settle in one place for very long. He was a bit too much like the ocean like that. Like the ocean, he could ruin an entire city's existence. He had planned to very much do so. He sighed as he traversed the tunnel. Quist chose one target, but he chose another. The city or the tree, which was to blame? Didn't matter. Both was going to be hurting when he and Quist were done. For a tree who let a monster nest be branches without a care, and the city who tried to wage war on it. Beta, Seth frowned harder. Why did it have to be so childish? The town was no better. It would not even let Seth bury his master on their land due to being on the tree's side. Her rights, her peace, her ways were all denied because Seth had remained peaceful until it was too late. Not willing to use magic as a tool of power and fear like Quist did. His friend screaming and trying to burn the tree that didn't even care that he was there. Then his master rose and Seth had to kill her for the second time. He paused and took a deep breath as he saw the tunnel was becoming covered with ice and sloshing water. He cooled down and whistled a tune his master had loved. Down the tunnel came a floating words, and Seth nearly stumbled in shock. The waves met the sun, and the wonderful sight of my eyes. On this cliff I could do stand, I cry in joy at the meeting. Come now, let the stars shine, and let them become our saviors. The words were even sung exactly like Dove's song. Sorry, it slipped out. I mean no pain to your heart. The giant demonic beast tipped its cap slightly. Seth stared at the giant mushroom's demon monster, whose roots spread up and out of sight. His large stone structure acted like a triangle at a stage. The beast itself was a nightmare's, but his words were soft. You are Isanella's companion, he asked. The mushroom bowed. Aren't I lucky? But seriously, between the two of you, you're both going to make me down in tears. Don't you people have happy songs? He said, half exasperating and half in jest. Seth then saw sitting nearby on the top of the most step was a small creature, Missy. She waved and trilled the bird song, and Maestro beamed. She's so talented, he bragged. Seth opened his mouth. His heart still ached as the song, and he could close his eyes before smiling. O kind bard of epic size, let me share some songs I learned from queens and barmaids alike, he offered. De-stress, peaceful, kind. He had to remember who he was and what his master had loved about him. Right as he did the unspeakable, she smiled, and he wept. Such an open heart. Good boy. She had smiled before the light faded. His heart was open, and now he poured out every shred of joyful moments and slightly exciting ones. He sat near the two of them and used his powers to form rings of ice crystals, and they began to sound out clear notes, and he made them vibrate at certain frequencies. Mr. Captain Maestro was even more excited. He joined in, and Seth sang, as in pain, and soothing like ice over the wound, for the moment. We've got a support and a frontliner, and I'm a bit too close with simple tricks, but I'm a glass, a one-hit wonder. Vass here is durability, and he's a gimmick character, so it's best not to rely on him other than when he can step up. We're lacking a mage to round out our weaknesses, Grim said to Dio, but flicking his eyes to the others to make sure that they were paying attention. Delta isn't actually a combat dungeon. Plenty of ways to get through without killing the thing. Kemi beamed. Grim looked up from his complicated map-making and pieces on the board to stand in front of them. Kemi fidgeted under his look, and he leaned back and grumbled. Fine. I guess we can just waltz in, sing some songs, and get rewarded, he huffed. Not a combat dungeon. Clearly, the cloudy wool was not firmly pulled over her frame, but her eyes as well. Delta was buffed to the max with epic monsters and unseen dangers. Sure, she might not use them, but that could change with some mass arrival of adventurers. The Cox, oh boy. They would not let her hear peaceful. Those psychos would hear easy and bum rush the dungeon. We could ask Delta to pretend, Dio suggested. Grim looked at him, baffled for a moment before it clicked. I suppose, but the spirit of the thing would be off. It would be like when we were kids and hitting each other with declaring that the person was dead, as the other would protest. He said slowly, It was a bad idea. If Delta could use blunt spears and pull punches, it was better than just taking a nifty tour. Okay, Dio, go ask. You know her the best. I'll get Poppy. She's a mage, and Ammonster could be good. 2 healers are better than 1. That makes a party of 6. He said, and he eyed the map with new eyes. Can I go back to my group? Cammy asked. Grim didn't even look up. No, you've been drafted into Team. He sighed loudly. Team Heroic Holy Pot and Friends, he said like he was chewing glass. Dio beamed and Vash tried to look positive. At least we have numbers. Delta would gain some good experience from this as well, he offered. Delta was going to stomp them so hard that Grim was going to develop an orange butt next. Ah well, it beat wandering the town and watching new shops appear and odd people start moving as the manor reached a new level. Someone even said that they saw Madame Goo at the pub. Now that was weird. Stop moving, Smalls hissed as Cram, covered in branches and leaves, was used as a tower by Smalls while it peered through the spyglass at the gathering Dio and friends. The robe, even as the user sat there looking ready to cry. She looked amazing. When you said that you were going to ride me outside, I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but this was the worst thing that sprung into mind, Cram admitted, and he chewed jerky. Smalls slapped the half-orc's head a little. Don't be crass. There are innocent small animals around, he said, watching the group split off as Dio walked with Kemi and Vass into the general direction of the dungeon. The dungeon dive. Smalls nearly wanted to gush as his robe would be seen in action soon. It's a good thing that I made a muscle, or you would have crushed my neck with those bird legs of yours by now. Cram calmly plucked Smalls off of his shoulder, and the man barely came up to his chin as he glared. I have dancer legs, he protested. You have bird legs. I've never seen them crash actual skulls when you get annoyed. Besides, I like your legs. Cram walked off as he denatured himself and the branches and leaves. Smalls was quiet for a second. Not a bird, he finally said. He needed to hurry up and test his invisibility cloak. He couldn't miss this model in action. Seth listened as Maestro talked through the various mushrooms as he headed to the boss room. An ominous door that was closed by a glaring goblin riding a pig imagery bore down on him. Ha! Seth amused himself greatly. Some good sights are waiting for you. 3rd floor is still reading some DIY fixing-upping, but Delta, sweet mother of us all, has a talent for making the ugly into the wildly wonderful. He chortled. Seth liked Maestro. The loud soul was someone who expected nothing of Seth, but gave Seth it all, regardless. If there was ever a port to sail back to from time to time, then this dungeon was shaping up to be it. Now, You want to test yourself, or can I peek in and let Fran give you a pass? Mum doesn't mind for now, Maestro offered. Seth blinked. I thought killing was frowned upon here, he asked. Maestro was quiet for a moment. Sir Fran is the spirit of battle. His rebirth after death only makes him train harder. It would honor him more if he fought, but you are free to pass, Maestro suggested. Seth smiled. I would be nothing if not interested to see the boss of Delta. Does my surrender still work in there? He mused. Maestro hummed and acknowledged. Dungeon-wide, baby. Do not pass, do not collect 100 gold, and go straight to the entrance, he listed. Seth smiled. He knocked. The door slid open. Seth stared at a wide underground arena with its white sand, carved empty audience seats. From a large crack in the wall, something moved, and Seth jumped a little as the torches above him ignited. And then 2 more burst into flame, followed by another 2 after that. This repeated until the large brazier above the crack was a raging bonfire. A large form slipped out of the crack, and Seth had to admit, this dungeon had style. And a bar. Are you the challenger? The well-spoken goblin asked. Seth could see why the Sir Fran, not merely Fran the boss. I am, if you would have me, Seth bowed. Sir Fran nodded under his helm, and then the large pig knelt in front of 2 legs to match. I can ask for no honor other than a duel between us, Sir Fran said clearly. He lowered his lance. I shall move in 5 seconds. Do be ready, Fran said jovially, as if it was something he hadn't expected but was enjoying. Then I shall move in 6, Seth fired back. His hearty laugh made Seth smile as well. Don't die, human. I would like to buy you a drink afterwards, Sir Fran called out, and his form blurred forwards. Seth pushed his hand out, and a wall of water rushed forward to meet the charge. The wave was split in 2 with no loss of speed from Sir Fran. Strong fellow. He used the water as a whip, pulling hard on the stalactite to swing it out of the way, and charge landed roughly at the side where he stomped his foot, causing a pillar of water to erupt where Sir Fran was trying to turn. The pig had durability and weight as he was barely lifted off the ground. He curled his hand, and the boss was enclosed in a swirling bubble of water. They struggled to escape, but it followed their struggles inch by inch. He was spending mana now to make water. The dry arena was working against him. The bubble exploded in a flash of orange and a stream that rushed towards death, as the sheer pressure of Sir Fran's stab created a funnel. Focused, he turned the boiling stream back into water by pushing it together so that it was only splashing on the sand and not Seth's skin. But the distraction left Sir Fran get close. He swung his lance. Seth raised one arm, eyes spreading like scales to deflect the blow, but he was still lifted clean off of his feet and sent crashing across the arena. He bounced up and surged forward like a rocket as his casual a wave of carrying him forward. He froze the water behind him, creating a line across the arena that Fran would have to watch out for. He formed a water lance on his left arm, and he charged. Sir Fran reared his pig back up, and he rushed forward to meet his joust. Seth grinned as his own lance spun like a drill, and the pressure at this point became deadly. He was surprised when Sir Fran's own lance exploded in orange light. They collided in an explosion of orange lights and steam. Seth crashed against the stands in a safer water bubble, but his arm was bleeding from the long cut where Fran had pierced through his ice scales and lightly grazed him. That was going to sting once his adrenaline died down, but he gathered his shield into a single aqua blade and waited for the cloud of steam to fade. No way he was going to fall for that old trick. Nobody, no one. He was proven right as Fran calmly walked out of the cloud, his pig looking a little flash-fried from the steam as well, as Sir Fran now having a tan, but nothing serious was injured. Hard for a first-level boss, Seth said. Fran grinned. I have levels of difficulty. You are simply nearing the hardest, but you'll have to come back in a few days for that. The harder you hit, the harder I hit back, the goblin said, not sounding tired at all. Hard. If you wanted it hard, my rather good-looking goblin, you only had to ask. Seth pointed his pressurized water sword, and the shaking in his grip and the sheer force. A bit of a mana sink, but it looked cool. Seth kinda wanted to look cool to Sir Fran. Then let us duel. Fran roared. Seth kicked it up a notch, and then from his manner, water rushed forward until he was soon riding half a horse, half fish creature as it swam through the air. Seth dived, bringing the waterfall down after him as the edge turned to a sharp piece of ice. Fran's lance did that orange thing again, and a wave of the first ice was cut away, but it was left Seth with an opening to use. Fran was strong, but he lacked a good denial of counters. But Seth was a wizard. He had his own weaknesses, like getting cocky or distracted by the pretty face or a strong jaw. He stabbed, and Fran turned his head so that his helm took the blow. The sawing of the metal was loud, and it made the recoil hard to control. Fran jumped, and Seth tried, and failed to redirect the blade upwards. Fran's armored head smashed into Seth's unprotected one. His water collapsed, and he rolled on the floor as Fran landed back on his pig and charged again. Seth was cursing as he scrambled to dive out of the way. His nose was a mess, and one eye had gone dark from Sir Fran's glancing blow. The goblin hadn't even gotten a good enough swing into the motion. This goblin was monstrous. He stopped focusing, and the waves of water exploded in every direction, turning the arena into a swampy mess, slowing Fran down into the muck. He reared up, making the pig jump for a solid audience stance where he had a stable ground. Smart gob. Seth spun his body and, while most likely confused, he wasn't going to suffer magically from it. Seth's power got stronger with less control. It was a pain. A waterspout formed, crashing into the ceiling, and it sucked in all falling rocks and balls of mud, turning the twisted brown and filling it with projectiles. The air was howling, and Seth was in the eye of the storm. He let his power flow and roared in return to Fran's earlier one. Layers of waterspout froze, and rings of jagged ice of the twister surged forward. Wipe it all away. Let his waters be the canvas washer of the world. His rings of ice were flung like discs, and Fran was forced to do mighty leaps and charge around the stands to avoid being bisected. A large shadow appeared on one side. Seth readied a wave of freezing water and swept the pig away noisily. But there was no goblin. From high above, amid the slight gaps where the ceiling dripped what Twister failed to touch, Fran dived directly down into the clear tunnel at Seth. Such cleverness, such power. Seth loved it. He raised his hand, his whole arm turning to ice, becoming one of the elements as the room was snapped frozen from the clear ice. 5 seconds, that was all Seth could handle of the spell, this form. The twister froze, and Fran's own form was frozen comet that was full aiming at Seth's heart. Seth snapped his fingers, and shards of ice became a storm as his arm exploded. This was going to be a pain to grow back. He blinked, and the goblin comet, now in pieces, racing past him, but the goblin lance still sunk deep into Seth's shoulder. He fell, and the room went quiet. Seth stared at the remarkably well-washed ceiling. "Fine, it's a draw. We'll take turns buying rounds," he called before passing out. Delta sat in the ruined room. Jaw dropped. She should do something, but she wasn't able to move. The scene was just... She wanted Fran's autograph. Home team was epic, and she wanted a fist pump, even if seeing Fran in the proud icy chunks was a little upsetting. His sheer bliss was infectious. "Go, Fran!" She cheered despite no one being left to hear her. "Vera, get the gobs and drag Seth into the bar. We need water and mushroom soup. Gob, go get Quiz." She began to act. Fran's new tiny core really did amazing things. It let him be adaptive to the manner of a person who approached his door. A Fran for everyone's level of skill. The first floor boss wasn't going to be a pushover to op people. She was giddy and felt like nothing could top this guest visit from this time. Dio stared at the cave-like entrance. Team Heroic Holy Pot and friends have come to ask a favor. He jumped and cheered. Kemi clapped politely. Vass inhaled, and he looked distantly down the stairs. Empty. Something is empty down there, he whispered, and followed his new friends down the stairs. Under his shirt a gem briefly glowed as it took in the fresh orange manna. End of chapter. That, my friends, concludes this episode. I hope that you enjoyed. If you wish to support the author of the story, there will be a link below. If you wish to support this channel, there are multiple ways to do so, which will all also be linked below. But the easiest way would be to subscribe and share my videos as much as possible. And until next time, I hope you all have a good one. And I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.